I'll be the first to admit that I'm one of the most skeptical people I know. I don't believe in ghosts or any other paranormal stuff. I'm quick to dismiss stories that seem fake or, at the very least, exaggerated. That's why I'm completely at a loss for words over what happened to me just weeks ago. I wanted to write all of this down while it was still fresh in my mind. I can't explain what happened to me, and to be honest, I'm still terrified. I thought maybe if I shared this online, someone out there could explain it. Hopefully somebody can. My friend Steve and his wife were going out of town for the weekend for their anniversary. The two of them don't get to travel alone very often because they have 2 kids and a dog. I know for some people that sounds like a first world problem, and you'd be right, but Steve isn't struggling financially. He built this huge house in the middle of nowhere because he values privacy, and if you're lucky enough to do that, I can't blame you. Well, for Steve and his wife, everything was lining up perfectly. Their kids were leaving town on some kind of school trip, so for once they'd be free with just the dog at home. When Steve told me all of this, I insisted on staying over and watching the dog for the weekend so the two of them could enjoy a romantic getaway. He agreed, and the plan was set. I'd be watching his beautiful golden retriever. I got to the house Friday afternoon. I didn't work weekends, so I planned to stay there from Friday through Sunday. Steve had stocked the place with food and snacks for me and made sure I had everything I needed. It was a little over the top for a weekend pet-sitting job, but I wasn't complaining. I love dogs, and I love quiet weekends, so it felt like a win-win. Now for the scary part. Friday night, the dog and I just relaxed and watched movies. Around 9 p.m., Steve texted me and said, "Don't get scared being all alone in that house. It can get pretty spooky at night when you're by yourself." I sent back a single LOL and told him to shut up. Like I said before, I'm a very skeptical person. Empty houses don't scare me. Being alone in the middle of nowhere doesn't scare me. I know anything can happen, but I just don't scare easily. I slept in the spare bedroom, and Steve's dog came with me. We went to bed around 1 a.m. At 3:21 in the morning, I woke up to the sound of the dog barking downstairs. It was that loud, vicious kind of barking. I won't lie, it definitely startled me, but more the surprise kind of fear, not the terrified out of my skin kind. I went downstairs, and the entire time, the dog never stopped barking. I finally found him in the kitchen, barking at the door that led to the basement. All the fur on his back was standing straight up, and he looked genuinely terrified by something. I kept calling his name and trying to calm him down, but he wouldn't stop. I grabbed the doorknob, and that sent him into a frenzy. He started running back and forth, barking even harder and completely losing it. Of course, my first thought was that maybe there was some kind of intruder in the basement. Possible, but unlikely. Steve had expensive security equipment everywhere, so breaking in wouldn't be easy. I grabbed a large knife from the kitchen and opened the door. The dog ran to the doorway, but he wouldn't go down into the basement. He just stood at the frame and growled, his fur still raised. I turned on the light and walked down the stairs. I started yelling random tough-sounding things, pretending to be braver than I actually was, but I didn't hear or see anything down there. I tried calling the dog to come down, but he refused to move. I even searched the entire basement to ease my mind. It was a finished basement, so I checked closets, every corner, behind furniture, and even the bathroom down there. No intruder, no evil ghosts. The only thing I did notice was how unbelievably cold it was. I know it was a basement, but I'd been down there plenty of times before, and it was never that cold. Even in the dead of winter, it had never felt like that. Still, a cold basement wasn't enough reason to panic and run. I spent the rest of the night in the living room. It took a while, but eventually the dog calmed down and we both fell asleep. The next day, the dog was completely normal. We played outside for a while, and I spent most of the day listening to music and watching movies. At one point, I went down into the basement, and the temperature was totally normal. It felt just like the rest of the house. I didn't think much about it and just went on with the day. That night, I decided to sleep on the couch in case the dog had another episode at the basement door. I wanted to stay awake later, but I ended up falling asleep while watching a movie. Once again, at almost the exact same time, I woke up to the dog throwing a fit and barking like the house was on fire. I rushed into the kitchen, and again I tried to calm him down, but he wouldn't listen for the second night in a row. But this night was different. I didn't think it was possible, but the dog was even more frantic than the night before. I knew nothing was down there, so I kept telling him everything was okay. It was like I didn't even exist. When I grabbed the doorknob this time, instead of barking, he started to cry and whimper. It was the strangest thing. I let go of the knob, and when I tried comforting him, he started barking again. I was annoyed and confused. One last time, I grabbed the knob and went downstairs. Again, the dog started crying and still refused to follow me into the basement. This time was different. It was still freezing cold, just like the night before, but now it smelled horrible down there. I don't know how to describe the smell other than just bad. But maybe the weirdest part was that some of the family pictures hanging on the wall had been knocked over, and the bar stools were lying on the floor. Other than that, nothing else had been moved or damaged. I picked up the stools and the pictures and placed them on the bar. The smell was so overwhelming that I didn't even want to stay down there. I went back upstairs, and for the next 30 minutes or so, the dog kept barking while I tried to think of what could be causing that smell. When he finally calmed down, I gave him a treat and we both fell asleep. When I woke up the next morning, I went into the basement to figure out the smell, but it was gone, not even a trace of it. The dog followed me downstairs too, completely happy and relaxed. For 2 nights, that dog refused to step foot in the basement with me, but now he walked down there like nothing had ever happened. I was completely stumped. I had no idea what happened those 2 nights. Steve got home around 1 in the morning, and as you'd expect, his dog was losing his mind with excitement. His wife took the dog outside, and I started catching up with Steve. He asked how everything went, and I told him for the most part it was great. He gave me a confused look when I said, for the most part, so I explained everything that happened over the weekend in detail. I fully expected him to laugh and assume I was joking, but he didn't laugh. He didn't even smile. He just stood there. Finally, he looked down and told me that when the dog was a puppy, he used to have these same barking fits at the basement door. Apparently, he hadn't done it in years, so Steve had forgotten all about it. They never knew why it happened. One day, it just stopped. I could tell Steve was freaked out, honestly, more freaked out than I was. We talked about it a little bit longer, but I kept telling him not to worry. It was probably nothing. It's been 2 weeks now, and I still haven't been able to stop thinking about it. Steve told me that since they got home, the dog has been completely normal and hasn't had a single basement door episode. I've tried looking into it myself, but I can't find anything that logically explains what happened. Every time I think I've found something that sort of makes sense, once I add everything together, it falls apart. So what's the deal? Can somebody explain why that dog was acting like that? What was that smell, and where did it come from? I need help because I'm losing sleep, and I don't even live in that house. I just want some kind of answer. I don't know if this counts as your typical scary story, but it was definitely disturbing and deeply unsettling, and somehow, the more time passes, the scarier it becomes for me. It was a few years ago now. I had just broken up with my boyfriend and moved into this cute little apartment. It was part of a larger apartment complex, and the place itself was beautiful, quiet, and elegant. I quickly became friendly with my neighbors and several of the other tenants. It really felt like a warm and welcoming little community. A few months into my lease, I thought I heard the sound of running in the hallway one night while I was getting ready for bed. I looked through the peephole, but I didn't see anyone. There weren't any kids living in my building, so I couldn't imagine who would be running around that late. Still, strange things happen, so I didn't think too much of it. The next few nights, I heard the sound again. I didn't get up to check because it didn't seem important at the time. It's worth mentioning that my apartment was on the ground level, and my windows faced a beautiful courtyard. The apartment door was still inside the building, and you needed a key to get in. It took me a little while to get used to having ground-level windows, because if someone wanted to, they could walk right up to my bedroom window. I'll say this, I wasn't worried about anyone in this community doing that. I'm only bringing it up because it became relevant later. One night, I woke up to what sounded like giggling outside my bedroom window. It was definitely weird, but I assumed some kids were being stupid and hanging around too close to my window. I tapped on the glass and made a loud shishing sound. The giggling stopped for a moment. Then I heard faint tapping coming from the other side of the window. That freaked me out, but I wasn't about to let some kids get the satisfaction of scaring me. Once I pulled myself together, I grabbed the curtain and yanked it open. There was nobody there, just the quiet courtyard and nothing else. Even if kids had been out there, I have no idea where they could have gone that quickly. I closed the curtain and brushed it off. I wasn't about to let some prank ruin my sleep. The strange giggling outside my window continued for the next few nights, but I learned to ignore it. I have younger nieces and nephews, and I know when you ignore their little pranks, they usually stop. That was my plan. I figured if I stopped reacting, whoever it was would get bored and move on. And unless they gave me a real reason to complain, I wasn't going to bother the apartment manager over something so minor. I think it was 2 days later, while I was at work, that I got an email from the complex manager. The tone of it felt short and serious. She asked if I could stop by the main office after work because she needed to show me something urgent. I told her I would. I remember being stressed the entire day. I thought maybe my rent payment hadn't gone through or something. When I got there, she told me to lock the office door behind me. Then she started speaking quietly, almost whispering. A man from the security office came in and sat beside me. The manager explained that while reviewing footage, the security guard had found something. She showed me security camera footage from the hallway outside my apartment. At around 2 in the morning, 2 small hooded figures walked up to my door. They looked about the size of children, maybe 10 or 12 years old. They just stood there in the grainy footage. The scariest part was when she fast-forwarded the video. They didn't move. For nearly 10 minutes, they stood there with their faces close to my door. Then, before leaving, one of them reached for the doorknob and tried to open it. You could clearly see the handle rattling a few times, but the door stayed shut. After that, both of them skipped out of frame. That was the moment I was finally scared. Whoever these kids were, they were focused on me for some reason. I told the manager and the security officer about the noises at my window, but when they checked those cameras, they found nothing. We still called the police and gave a statement. They told me that if anything else happened, I should call again, but at that moment, there wasn't much they could do. The security officer tried tracing where the kids went after leaving my door, but it was like they disappeared. They couldn't find them on any other camera in the complex. The next night, I decided to stay awake. I was going to catch these kids one way or another. But nothing happened. No giggling, no hallway sounds. It was about a week later when I heard something again. It was about 1:30 in the morning. I muted the TV and listened carefully. Then I heard my doorknob rattling. It was happening again. They were back. I ran to the door and yelled for them to get away. I heard a child laughing. Then another soft little voice whispered, "Mom, we're home. Just open the door and let us in." I froze. I looked through the peephole and saw 2 small figures standing there with their heads lowered. The voice whispered again, "Please, let us in. We're home now, please." That last please sounded desperate. I didn't care. I shouted that their mother didn't live there anymore and that I was calling the police. Both children started giggling. Then the doorknob began shaking again. One of them started throwing their body against the door, but it wouldn't budge. I stood there bracing the door with my hands. After a minute, everything went quiet. No laughter, no rattling. I looked one last time through the peephole. Nobody was there. I was too scared to open the door in case they were hiding just outside my view. I called the police. They were quick to assume it was local kids playing a prank. Honestly, that sounded like the most logical explanation. I gave my statement, and that was it. A few days later, I ran into the apartment manager in the parking lot. She pulled me aside and asked if anything else had happened. I told her no, and that I was sure it had just been neighborhood kids. She made a strange face and said she wasn't so sure. Then she told me the woman who had lived in my apartment before me was strange. She didn't give me many details for privacy reasons, but she said she believed something terrible had happened involving that woman's children. She wouldn't explain further. She wouldn't give names. She only implied that something horrible happened, then stopped talking. She said she had already shared too much and didn't want to get in trouble for revealing personal information. Then she told me to be careful and to keep my doors locked. I'll never forget her walking away and saying, "This wasn't a prank." As far as I know, those kids never came back to my apartment while I lived there, but I've spent years wondering what really happened. Who were those children? What did the apartment manager mean? Was she implying they were ghosts? I know how insane that sounds, and I'm sure that's not what it was, but you have to admit, it's strange. It still bothers me that the police and security staff couldn't figure out where those kids went after leaving my door. And something hit me after I had already moved out. There should have been no way for children to get into that building. Like I said before, there weren't any kids living in my building. So how did they get in? Where did they go? The more time passes and the more I think about it, the more unsettling it becomes. What amazes me most is that I wasn't more terrified in the moment. Years have gone by. I don't even live there anymore. And somehow I'm more scared now writing this than I was while it was happening. I still don't believe in ghosts or anything paranormal, but I can't explain what it was. Neighborhood kids are the easiest answer, but the more I replay it in my head, the less possible that feels. I know how this story sounds, but I think it's worth sharing, because maybe I really did experience something that wasn't from this world. This story I'm about to share happened to me around 10 years ago. Without a doubt, it was one of the most terrifying things I've ever experienced. I actually stopped telling people about it because most of the time they assumed I was lying or making it up. It was my husband who encouraged me to finally write it down and share it. He said maybe someone out there had gone through something similar. So here it is. Back then, I worked a dead-end job. Like most people, it was just a way to pay the bills. The routine and monotony of retail work was slowly draining the life out of me. One afternoon, as I was leaving work, I noticed something neon pink hanging from my car door handle. It was a sticky note with a cheerful little message written on it. It simply said, "You're special, and I hope you have an amazing day." There was also a smiley face sticker attached. I thought it was sweet, and it made me smile. Other than that, I didn't think much of it. The next few days, every time I left work, there was another message waiting for me in the exact same spot. I know some people would say that's creepy, but honestly, I liked the attention. At that point in my life, I wasn't getting much attention at all, so it felt nice to be noticed. After 3 or 4 of those friendly notes, I decided to respond. That morning, before work, I brought my own sticky notes and left one on my car door. I kept it playful and friendly while walking the line of being just a little flirtatious. When I got off work that afternoon, I was excited to see another note waiting for me. The flirting had worked because this person flirted right back. I didn't know if it was a joke or something serious, but either way, I kept the little game going for the next few days. The shift before I had a day off, I left a note that said something like, "Don't miss me too much while I'm gone." When I came out after work, there was a sticky note with nothing but a sad face drawn on it. That's when I assumed the game would end. Someone had their fun, I played along, and now that I'd be gone for a day, I figured the whole thing would fade away. I couldn't have been more wrong. The next morning, I spent some time around the house. It was late morning when I stepped outside for the first time. That's when I saw it. Another neon pink note stuck to my car door. I honestly couldn't believe it. I walked toward it cautiously and peeled it off. It said, "You look cute when you're sleeping." That was the moment everything changed. I was scared. After thinking about it for a while, I convinced myself someone from work was messing with me. They had to know where I lived. It was the only explanation that made sense. I crumpled the note and threw it away. When I returned to work, the notes continued for several more days. At first, they were still friendly, but by the third day of me refusing to respond, they became cruel. The sweet messages turned into things like, "You better answer me," and "Remember, I know where you live." I thought about calling the police, but I was still convinced it was someone I knew trying to scare me. So the next morning, I left a note of my own. I wrote that they needed to leave me alone or I would call the police. I didn't truly plan to call, but if it was someone I knew, I thought that threat would finally make them stop or reveal themselves. When I got off work that afternoon, my note was gone, and for the first time in days, there was no new note waiting for me. I felt relieved. I still wanted to know who it was, but if it was over, I was happy. That night, I woke up sometime after midnight because I thought I heard something. Ever since the note outside my house, I'd been on edge. I sat in bed silently, listening. Then I heard it again, a faint shuffling sound. I couldn't tell if it was just the house settling or something far worse. I told myself I was imagining it. Still, I wasn't taking chances. I grabbed a baseball bat and stepped into the hallway leading from my bedroom to the open living room. With every step, my mind imagined the worst. And the truth is, if someone had really been standing there, I don't think I could have swung that bat. I'm just not that kind of person. I reached the end of the hallway and stopped. Whatever courage I had when I left my room was gone. From the hallway, I could see my living room, dining room, and kitchen. I turned on the dim lights and scanned everything from where I stood. I was too scared to go farther. I kept imagining someone crouched behind the couch, waiting. I stood there in silence for nearly a minute. I heard nothing. Eventually, I turned the lights off and walked quickly back to my bedroom. At any second, I expected someone to rush at me from behind, but nothing happened. I locked my bedroom door and turned on the TV. I needed noise, anything to drown out the silence. At some point, I finally fell asleep. When I woke up the next morning, I had almost forgotten how scared I'd been. I walked to the fridge to grab some juice, and that's when I saw it. A bright pink sticky note was attached to the refrigerator. It said, "You can't keep me away," and beneath it, another smiley face sticker. I froze. For at least 30 seconds, I couldn't move. Then I ran to check every door and window in the house. They were all still locked. I know for a fact no one else had a key. My family lived in another state, and I wasn't close enough with anyone nearby to trust them with one. Somehow, this person had entered my house and left a message on my refrigerator. I wasn't playing around anymore. I called the police and told them everything. They said they investigated, but they couldn't find anything useful. Random notes weren't much to go on. At least that's what they told me. They did check the cameras in the parking lot at my job, but where I parked, the cameras didn't reach. Employee parking was on the side of the building, no cameras there. The police concluded it had to be someone I knew. I would have agreed if it weren't for the note inside my house. I'm obsessive about locking doors, so I know no one should have been able to get in. I stayed at a friend's house for a couple nights because I wasn't ready to sleep at home. We went to a hardware store and bought all new locks for every door. The first night back at my house, my friend stayed with me. Nothing happened. Then, a few months passed. No new notes at work, nothing at home. I thought it was over. More than 2 months later, I was leaving for work one morning when I saw another horrible pink note on my front door. I snatched it off immediately. It read, "I guess you don't want to play anymore." I called the police right away, but they didn't do much. After that, I invested in security cameras, but nothing ever happened again. Changing those locks may have saved my life. Somehow, that person must have had a key. It's the only explanation that makes sense. What I still can't understand is why me, and who was it? Whenever I think back on that entire experience, I feel sick. I think about the night I heard movement inside the house. There had to have been someone hiding somewhere just inches away from where I was standing. Why didn't they hurt me then? Sometimes I wonder if frightening me was all they wanted. A friend once told me that when I ran back to my room and locked the door, it's possible that person tried to get in, and locking it may have saved my life. It's been 10 years since that final note. Nothing has happened since. I've moved, I'm married now, but every time I see those stupid pink sticky notes, I'm taken right back to that nightmare. Whatever the truth was, I'm just grateful I'm still here to tell the story.